Well, I don't know about you, but I've heard stories about the Dust Bowl, and I think yesterday it was like, oh, must have been what it must have been like. Except it was worse back then. Yeah, except it was worse back then. You know, we live in a day and age where we think about the way things were in the past, and we think about the way things are now, and we sometimes wonder, what in the world will tomorrow bring? Each and every one of us, in our life, we communicate. It's with what we say. Sometimes it's with what we don't say. It was kind of funny. Just a little bit of insight into our relationship. Again, just because we're talking about, how we communicate in a message and things like that today. I made a comment earlier that my bulletin was gone, and I sat down in the little chair. Renee said, "It's sitting there right there by you." And I was like, "It's not. I'm just a man. I'm sorry." I had some bulletin inserts, and then Charlie came out. It's like, "Oh, thank you, Charlie, man." Brings me the bulletin, and I got vindicated. And it's like, oh, I'm not losing my mind, and everything's okay, Everything's okay. We live in a world, though, where in the church, our language matters. What we say matters. In 1 Peter chapter 2, as we number it in our English, Peter writes to the church, to the group of believers, and he reminds them, and reminds us still today, about how we communicate, because what we say, do, and believe matter. He says, therefore, rid yourselves of all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Now, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, you think about it. Here's Peter. He's making a list. It's like, what do I say to the church? What do I say to believers? And he gives us a list of what not to do. Malice, envy, deceit, hypocrisy. Isn't it interesting that when you get a group of people together, my goodness, how we can turn on each other so quickly. Here's Peter saying, what you say matters. How you talk about fellow believers matters. Now, he could have just said, be nice to each other, and then let nice be relative. But if we understand the call of the Christian, if we understand the call of the church, how we treat each other matters, because people are always watching. He says this in verse 2. He says, like newborn babies crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you've tasted that the Lord is good. You see, what happens in the process as we develop as believers, it's not uncommon for us to let the rest of our life filter into our church life, if you would like to say it that way. I'm not sure how it is where you work. I've been in a pretty competitive situation in the corporate world where one department kind of has it out for another department, or especially in negotiations and things like that. And you sit down at the table and you're trying to figure out how's the money going to get spent this year? And everybody wants their extra dollar at the negotiating table when budget time comes around in the corporate world. And it's amazing. People who get along 360 days a year for 5 days during that budget talk. Holy cow, they don't need that. I had this thing. My vice president came to me and she said, Larry, I want you to prepare a budget. And I want you to get, money's not an object. Tell me the amount of money that you need for the tools that you need, and just shoot for the moon. Type, research, type, make the list. Walk in and gave her the list. She said, thank you very much. Now, part of me was thinking, what in the world just happened here, right? All I get is a thank you very much. Here's what happened. She came back to me after she went to the budget meeting, and she said, yeah, sorry, you didn't get anything. Why'd I do it? She said, well, we just wanted to see what you needed to do stuff with us. Like, you had me do all this with absolutely no promise of getting anything in return? Yeah. Sometimes it's like that, Larry. Sometimes you just have to do what you're asked with no promise of return. But at least now we kind of know what some other tools that you need, and we're going to try to start working on that. And it's finally, it's like, okay, here's what happens. What I saw during that week, people who really get along, but we just sometimes disagree. It's interesting that there's this whole idea about growing up with pure spiritual milk. I've often wondered, how is it that we as people grow up in Christ? You see, we start with a very, very simple message. Jesus Christ, He came. He died on a cross, and He rose again. That's the essence and the beginning of our faith. We understand that because we believe that Jesus Christ died and rose again, that our Heavenly Father loves us, that there are some simple truths that we can hang on to. That is pure spiritual milk. But what happens as we continue to grow? We still have to get rid of the old stuff in our life as we find our way walking through this road of sanctification. And there's a point in time in spiritual maturity where Peter says, don't do that anymore. You see, if we as believers are what God has chosen to leave His message with, then what we say, what we do, and what we believe matters. How many of you have ever been a part of any kind of building project, whether it was a house or something in maybe a church or business or anything? Ever been a part of that? Again, you've been a couple of us. We was in a point in time where we were watching a house getting built, Renee and I. Okay, and we were out there. We were watching, and out comes the guys, and they put all these stakes in the ground. And this is where the house is going to be. And they measure everything and they get it just right. And then the cement comes and it's poured. And it's like 5 weeks later, nothing's really going on. But people are always there and nothing's ever going. You know how that part is? It's like, it's been 5 weeks and you've absolutely nothing to show for it but just a plate of cement. And what have you guys been doing for 5 weeks? You go home and the next day, like, the whole house is up. But it just sticks. It just sticks. And then, it's like, man, for about 2 days, everything comes together, and there's walls, and there's ceiling, and there's this and that. And then they tell you it's still another 6 weeks before you get to move in. And nothing happens. It's like, it's the same. Hey, guess what? We put those light switch in. It's like, really? That's all you've done for like the last 3 days is put a light switch in? Here's what happens. You see, spiritual growth and spiritual development reminds us that we're like a building in progress. We might just have the foundation of Jesus Christ. Some of us might still be in that, we're just kind of getting the walls put together, but we don't have them up yet. Some of us are in that whole thing where God's reconstructing the inside of our life, and we've got a whole new set of operations and things like that on the inside. Some of us are more subtle. So maybe God's still working on the wiring or the plumbing or the drywall. And then here it is. For some of us, God's still working on the finishing. It was amazing to me as we were watching a house being built. It's like, 3-4 days. They're cutting the baseboards and everything had to fit just right. And they go through it. And it doesn't seem like it takes a lot of time for those finishing things. And then came the fun part. One of the guys said, I got to go through and fill up every one of those finishing nail holes with putty. These are crawling along the ground, Putty this one, it goes 6 inches, putty the next one. And sometimes our spiritual life feels like, well, sometimes God is just doing some little things in our life and is not really revolutioning things. You see, we live in this whole understanding, as Peter's getting ready to describe this for us, that we're building in process. God's not done with you, and God's not done with me yet. And in this process of spiritual building our lives, where does Jesus come in? Charlie read for us earlier. He said, as you come to him, the living stone, talking about Jesus, that Jesus was rejected by men, but was chosen by God. Okay, we have no problem with that. We see Jesus, we know that Jesus was rejected by men, but he's chosen by God. And then watch this. And precious to him. See, sometimes we think that, well, God, why did you do this to your son Jesus? And yet in this whole time, God is saying, Jesus, you are precious to me. That's why I do it. Not only that, not only is Jesus precious to God, but you and I are precious to God. And he brings us into this encounter with Jesus Christ. And it's at that point in time that we have to understand what's happening. He says, you, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You and I are being built. And the thing is, sometimes we just wonder, where do we fit in? Where do we fit in? It's always fun to go and take a look at stone structures. And if I were to have a secret desire, sort of, what kind of house would you like to live in? Kind of like for it to be one of those old stone houses. I mean, I love log houses. I think that'd be really cool. But to actually think about the whole, where everything's kind of cut, fit, and mortared together and put together, and it's how our life fits together. I'm just kind of an old, rustic kind of, either that, I just don't like it. This is just me, okay? Just kind of like that old feel to it. Also, the nice thing is with the stone house, it won't blow away in this kind of wind, right? So here's what happens. God takes your life, God takes my life, and he puts us together. God takes people in the church and he fits them together according to a design. He has a design in mind. Have you ever had to follow building plans of any kind? Sometimes they get a little confusing, at least for me. I'm in the process of building a model airplane. I went through the first 3 pages, got that part done, got that part done, got that part done. And the guy who had written the instructions, near the end said, oh, by the way, in the middle of page 2, you need to do this. It's like, that would have been helpful to know on page 2. Right? It's like, really? This is how you're going to? So I was like, you just kind of, sometimes we feel like, because we don't know where we fit. Or think we got something out of order. And that's why what we say and how we work together is so important. Because God is using us to build his kingdom. And he has a spot for you and he has a spot for me. And it all has to do with, where is Jesus in this process? And as we think about the message, if it's about what we say and what we do and what we believe, where is Jesus in the process? The question comes down to is, where do we put the rock? Not a rock, the rock. Where do we put Jesus Christ in this? Here's the way that Peter describes it, okay? For in Scripture it says, in verse 6, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone. The one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. The cornerstone, as they did back then, was the one where everything came off of. And so if you and I are the living stones that are being used to build this thing that God has a design for, guess what that means? It means that our lives have to line up with Jesus. If our lives are not lined up with Jesus, we're out of place. And if we're out of place, it doesn't feel good. And it's not sound structurally. That's why it's so important for you and I to understand how this whole thing of church community works. Because if we're out of place, it doesn't feel good. And we're not structurally sound. The other thing you can do with Jesus, if we don't use him as a cornerstone, we see here is about the idea of a capstone. Now, to those of you who believe, the stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the capstone. In other words, if we don't see we fit together, guess what? Jesus is going to be the top. He's going to hold it all together. We're still going to be out of place. Or it's like this. A stone that causes men to stumble and a rock that makes them fall. Now, of all the stories that I could tell, this is the one story. Excuse me for just a second. This is the one story that I'm kind of ashamed of because it kind of happened this way, all right? Here's what happened. I'm in high school. I appreciate this because I've got high school kids, and especially on Friday night, what does a high school kid go out and do? Go out and spend gas money. You know, just what we did at Eno, drove up and down Van Buren Street, you know, from McDonald's down to the Bronx, and we just kind of hung out, did our thing. Well, apparently what had happened while I was out doing that on Friday night, my dad, who kind of is a tinkerer, he works on electronic things, a guy dropped off an a guitar amp. So my dad said, hey, thank you very much. Takes the guitar amp from the gentleman, comes in and places it in the hallway just past the door. Now, here's how this whole story works. It's about 11:30 because I'm a good kid. That was funny. It's about 11:30 at night because I was a good kid, and I come in the door. It may have been 12. I was probably a little bit late. You know, so you're kind of sneaking in, you know, making sure you don't wake people up. That's why we tell our kids to wake us up when you come home, because otherwise, I sleep like a log. It's been 3 days. Oh, they were gone. Okay. So I come in, and my little toe on my right foot catches the corner of this huge guitar amp in the dark. I kicked my shoes off, and I'm in my socks. And now, if you've ever been in this thing, there's this urge that's created in the human body that if I get pain, the only way to get pain out is for me to hit something that's close by. And I feel like I'm going off balance, and I take my hand and I hit the wall. Bam! And at 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, my hand goes through the wall, through the drywall. I've got mess going everywhere. Lights are coming on. My sister's yelling. My mom and dad are screaming. They're coming down the hallway. What in the world's going on? Who put this thing in the road? Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Had this great big hole in the wall. Now, you know, as a high school, you're thinking, holy cow, I'm going to have to go back to work. Pay this thing off. My mom did the most amazing thing. She says, don't worry about it. The next day she gets up, it's Saturday, she has this nice decorative broom. Hangs it right on top of the hole. Covers it up, nobody knows. It was like that until they get ready to move out. Okay, now, sometimes our life is like that. And here's what it is. Jesus becomes that stumbling stone for us. You see, Jesus gets in the way. And what happens when Jesus gets in the way, we reach out with everything that's inside of us because we don't want to deal with the hurt inside of our lives. And we just direct that hurt to whatever's close by. Sometimes we poke holes in the wall. Sometimes we poke holes in people. Sometimes we just cover it up and pretend like it never happened. But the reality of it is that you and I at some point in time will get hung up on Jesus. And it will feel like we've busted our little toe. And it hurts. Because Jesus has a way of dealing with stuff inside us that we really don't want to pay attention to. Because if we were to line up with Him, it might put us in a spot where we really think we don't want to be. And here is where the message starts. You see, the message it starts with Jesus. And it starts with how we talk with each other. And it starts with where do we put Jesus in the middle of things. But see, sometimes we just get hung up on Him. What do? Sometimes we get hung up on Jesus because of disbelief. This is one where it's just very simply, there's no way that Jesus could have done what He did. There's just no way that He could have gone to the cross. There's just no way that a dead guy gets up out of the ground and comes back walking around. There's no way that God loves me that much. It was my second year of Bible college, moving into the dorms and got a new neighbor. Came in, we started visiting, as new neighbors do with the dorms, how that happens. And I said, why'd you come to Ozark? He said, let me tell you why I came. He said, there's no way that God can love me, but maybe He can love somebody else through me. Say that again. He said, there's no way that God can love me, but maybe I can help save someone else. Wait, so you can't be saved, but yet you hope that somebody will be saved through something that you say. Yeah, got it. So why can't you be saved? Because I've done a lot of bad things. About 3 months later, he's no longer around. Because he didn't believe the gospel. The other one's disobedience. Sometimes we don't believe in Jesus and we don't believe the story. The other thing is we just disobey it. We're just so used to having it our own way that we can't let Jesus be the one who lines us up, and we just want to stay out of line. Both of those things happen in our lives. It's out of line with Jesus Christ. Disbelief, disobedience. And what that does, as God's building this entire thing with you and I as living stones, is it weakens the message. It weakens the story. See, because if you and I are lined up, we're where we're supposed to be. Those who are the foundations are on the foundations. We're lined up with Jesus. Those who are in the corners are in the corners. Those who are windowsills are windowsills. Those who are at the top are at the top. However it works out in our whole way that we're structured this wall and structured this creation that God's doing. When it's all put together, it says, oh, look what Jesus can do with a bunch of stones that don't look like they go together. How much better can that be than that? You see, the message is the message of redemption. The message is the story about no matter what our lives look like by ourselves, how rough our rock is, how out of line it is. Jesus, through His miraculous love, brings us into line. He cuts those hard things off. He gets us working together. He creates a church of people who are knitted together, formed together as living stones, doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. And people step back and they say, wow, that must be an amazing builder you have. And that builder is Jesus Christ. It's the story of redemption. Watch what Peter says about this story of redemption. Verse 9. You, and I think he writes this with a smile. He says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. If you've never thought where you fit, this God tells you right here. That you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness and into His wonderful light. If you've ever wondered what your spot here is as a living stone in the construction of God, is it you are to declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness and into the wonderful light. My job is to declare the praises of Him who called me out of darkness and into His wonderful light. If you have been delivered from darkness, you have some kind of praise to sing. If you have found the light of Jesus, you have a praise to sing. You have something to share. You see, the essence of us people being put together by Jesus Christ is so that we can declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into His wonderful, what? Say it with me. Light. You see, we are to declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into light. Say it with me. Light. We are to declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into His light. Right? We are to declare we got this yet? We are to declare the praises. Yeah, there you go. We are to declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into His wonderful light. All right. Now, if we do that together, say it with me and listen. We are to declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into together. Unity. It's there. And everybody who walks by and sees the same people with the same message, different lives, different struggles, different things that they're wrestling with, different parts along the process, different parts along the building, different parts as God is building us together. We are to declare the praises of Him who called us out of darkness and into His wonderful light. When we say that message together, people stop and they say, wow, that's the Jesus I want to see. You see, we think the message sometimes is come to our church. We think the message sometimes is come and sing with us, or come and do this with us, or come and do that with us, or go here and do this and take 3 hours of your busy life and come to church and do something with it for 3 hours. And if that's how we've always processed church, we've missed the message. You see, because we're a holy people, we're a chosen people, together with one thing, to talk about the praises of Jesus Christ, who called us out of darkness and brought us into this light. Watch this here, lest we ready to finish this up. See, he says, once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy. That means we're sitting over here without it. And Jesus comes into your life. And now you have mercy. He says, dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of wrongdoing, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that He visits us. We live differently because God redeemed you. I live differently because God redeemed me. The message. The praise to Jesus Christ because He's called us out of darkness and into light is the message that we have. And we wonder why the message gets lost. Disobedience, disbelief. We don't really talk with each other the way that we should. See, if we're living out of line with Jesus Christ, the message doesn't make sense. It becomes a Hollywood version. It becomes a Hollywood version of the story of redemption. I had the privilege once of being in a film for one whole day, which wasn't too bad because it meant donuts for breakfast and pizza for lunch. Okay? Out of 8 hours of shooting, I got 20-some seconds of my back in one scene. And my suit that I had at that particular point in time. And everything was pieced together. Just get the shot. I was holding, at one point in time, holding this red piece of plastic over a light while they're doing one, this one little 20-second shot. And they did it 17 times. I'm thinking, I'm done holding this red thing, and this is nothing but fake. Yeah. And that was a low-budget film, and I can't imagine how much fake stuff is in the big-budget films. But it doesn't make sense. It's just telling a story, and it's not real. You see, the message of redemption is the most real thing that the church has to offer. It's real because it changes your life, it changes my life. And if we're not singing the praises about Jesus Christ, we're doing something wrong. I want to ask you today, if you're not singing the praises of Jesus, what's stopping you? What's so more important than that? I know this much. The church that sings the praises of Jesus, that shouts it from the rooftop, that's in part of every conversation, that message is real, and people's lives are changed because of the love of Jesus Christ. Would you be real today?